That includes a little bud in your hand. Okay. However, given the debate between states and federal, and the fact that there are marijuana shops that are operating within state guidelines, it's more the DEA's role to attack and or identify large-scale organizations that are operating internationally across borders, profiteering, and let's just say meeting a certain set of criteria that fall in a much higher category. That's our mission, and that's what we try to stick to.
Just following up a little bit. So we have done,
Here.
Oh, sorry. We have done investigations over the past several years on dispensaries, and it has been large to the extent to which we've been involved has been dictated by policy that has come from our headquarters and also from the Department of Justice. So we have been looking into at dispensaries. We do enforce federal law against certain dispensaries at certain times because it is illegal under federal law. Essentially, and not to get into the weeds too much about it, but no pun intended, right? What? I didn't even mean to do that. I meant to do that. I meant to do that. I did. I'm a funny guy. There is something called the Cole Memo, and that is a memo that was drafted by an ex-Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice 2 years ago, that basically set out policy for the law enforcement components that work under the Department of Justice, which essentially, for all practical purposes, meant us, because we're the lead drug agency, that laid out several criteria in which we would get involved in a marijuana investigation and enforce federal law. So in other words, if you have a dispensary that is operating legally under state law, we would have to analyze their activities with regard to the prongs of the Cole Memo. And that Cole Memo lays out certain criteria, for example, if they're also involved in gun trafficking, distribution to minors, things like that, aggravating factors. At that point, we would decide whether or not we were going to enforce federal law in that case, and we would also analyze whether or not we would get involved from a resource standpoint, like their impact on the community. So we have actually enforced the law against marijuana as recently as this year. We executed some warrants on some dispensaries, but for the most part, how we are dictated by the Cole Memo that tells us when to actually enforce federal law. And I have to tell you, I mean, you know, like my colleague Chris here said, I mean, our real focus is trying to keep it from coming across the border and distributing in wholesale. So that's really our focus. But however, we will get involved and we will enforce federal law in the appropriate circumstance, if that answers your question.
VJ and Chris, let me ask a quick question.
Yes.
The cultivation and distribution of marijuana on a large-scale network basis, it has to, these dispensaries, and by last count there's probably close to 10,000 dispensaries, they have to get their product from somewhere, and that somewhere is the cultivation and distribution. That's a very large-scale operation. They're not growing it themselves. They're not distributing. Well, they are distributing it themselves, but not on a wide-scale level. So, isn't that the grower, the distributor, the main distributors? Aren't they in violation?
So long as this Cole Memo that he brought up, you know, let's think of it as a list. So long as they're adhering to that list, then technically they're within the guidelines of the state. If they're cultivating it and they have the number of cooperative members that they're supposed to have, well, then that's state law. So I understand what you're getting at. Maybe you're saying there's a warehouse somewhere in Van Nuys with 10,000 plants.
There has to be.
Well, I know there is. I've done one. So, so to get to the point, yeah, we go after those individuals if they are cultivating at a grand scale, if they're involved in organized crime, those that are cultivating, if they're profiteering at a tremendous amount, if there's certain circumstances that are underlying that marijuana grow, that would be one of our focuses, yes. I think there was another, yes.
You mentioned cells. Is that different from gangs?
No, I call them cells. You can work a gang case, and if you're working a gang case within a gang, you can have a cell. So it kind of doesn't apply to each different group, but a cell to me is a group of people who are organized and conspiring to commit violations of the law. That would be a cell to me.
So, for example, in a large trafficking organization, you're going to have several cells. You're going to have a cell that smuggles it across the border. You're going to have a cell that transports it to stash houses. You're going to have cells arranging for distribution, and then you're going to have cells that collect money. So, and all of these organizations are very compartmentalized. Okay, one doesn't know what the other one's doing. That way, if one cell gets busted, and the other cells can, still.
That's similar to that drop house you guys found a couple of weeks ago with all that cocaine down in Downey or somewhere down there.
Well, that would be an example of. You're talking about the 300 kilos. Is that what you're talking about? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, sure. That would be an example of like one cell, maybe a stash house, distribution consolidation type of cell. But the fact that those drugs got taken off, that doesn't mean that the other cells will continue to operate, because one cell doesn't always know what the other cell is doing. However, because we investigate the way we investigate, we utilize all these resources from intelligence from around the country. We utilize wiretaps and things like that. We are able to put together all the pieces, and our method of operation is to collect all these evidence over a number of years, as Chris mentioned, and then in one fell swoop, take it down. And that's when you'll see us on the news usually, is when we take down this large scale. Because we don't want to make a move until we're able to get all of these ducks in a row. Everybody's investigation is complete, so we can all kind of maximize our impact.
Did that answer your question? Okay. And did you get your answer?
Well, I don't know much about this, but isn't it like Catch-22 where dispensaries can sell it, but the legal aspect is a transportation of it? So they could grow it somewhere, but they can't transport it, but they can sell it at the dispensary. Isn't that where you...
I got to tell you, I know that it's not legal to transport over the state line, for sure. However, within this area, you could have a grow remotely located from the actual physical dispensary, and you could transport between the grow and the dispensary. So it's not, well, if you're operating under the dispensary and you have a license to do so, yes.
Chris, can you talk a little bit about the heroin proliferation and how that's become kind of a big issue, where in the 90s it was not...
Oh, but gone.
I mean, it was just, in high schools it was basically just pot and people getting drunk, and now they're on ecstasy, heroin, and everything else.
Well, I think everybody who's read any news or watched the news knows that heroin is an epidemic in the United States. And not only the United States, it expands out to other countries as well. And to answer your question, this is kind of common knowledge at this point. The epidemic more than likely started with prescription medications. To name one, OxyContin, Vicodin, there's two. And the diversion of those prescription medications to the street, and then tighter controls in the government with making those diverted medications illegal and or more difficult to obtain without licenses and crackdowns on doctors, that caused a void in the supply of prescription medications to street users, and that in turn raises the price on the street of an OxyContin tablet from maybe $20 to $60 or $80. So depending on what geographic area you are in the country. What that does is it takes the user and opens a void for a supplier to come in and provide a product with at a lower price. It's just like a business. So if you have a market and you give a product at a lower price, you're going to shift the market over from the prescription medication to, let's use black tar heroin as an example, which is a Mexican product that comes up from south of the border. That product comes up to our streets all over the United States, up through Canada, up in Alaska, and it's a fraction of the cost of an OxyContin tablet. And a lot of young people in high school who've gone to pill parties and who have gotten addicted to OxyContin, once they get out of the house and they're in college and then they're off on their own, well, $80 or $50 for an OxyContin tablet's not going to cut it. It's a lot easier to pay $30 or $20 for a hit of heroin, and that's how the transition gets made, and that's how it becomes an epidemic. Hopefully that answered your question.
One thing also, just to follow up, so just so you know, OxyContin is basically a synthetic form of heroin.
Of course.
It's called a synthetic opioid. Okay, it's a painkiller. Okay, and so the reason is that when OxyContin became harder to get on the street due to enhanced enforcement efforts as well as reformulation by the manufacturers to make it harder to put up, when that happened, like Chris said, it created a void for people who were addicted to opioids. Well, the organization, trafficking organization, recognized that, and the demand for heroin went up. So what they did in response is they created cheaper and more powerful forms of heroin. And right now, up and down the eastern seaboard, this has become such an epidemic. Hundreds, thousands of deaths all across the eastern seaboard, to some extent in Ohio. And the other thing I want to say is, I don't know if any of you have heard of fentanyl. Fentanyl is a pharmaceutical grade medication that's normally taken in very small amounts via patches for cancer patients. It's 50 to 100 times more powerful even than morphine, which is used in hospitals. 50 to 100 times. Well, what the trafficking organizations are doing in order to get people more hooked on heroin is they are creating fentanyl in clandestine laboratories south of the border, and they're taking this fentanyl and they're mixing it in with the heroin, making it extremely addictive. And just to give you a visual, if I took a salt shaker and I just had a few grains of that salt in the palm of my hand, just a few, that amount of fentanyl can kill you.
Lethal dose.
Yeah, that can kill you. It's so powerful that it's usually only administered through patches transdermally. But they're putting this stuff in the heroin. So a lot of people are dying because they're just putting too much fentanyl in the heroin that they're selling. So
Where's the opium coming from? Is that Turkey or Mexico?
Mexico, absolutely. Mexico, also in Afghanistan, Pakistan. Okay.
Over there.
Also in Mexico as well.
Wow.
Yes. I have not. I don't have a lot of time to read. Yes. Yeah. If I get a free week where I don't have to run out here at 4 o'clock in the morning and drive around your city, I'm sure there's a different perspective in that book that could perhaps enhance my knowledge. So, yes. Are we good? Anything else?
Anything else for Mr. Wilson? All right.
You know what? I just want to just wrap it together in one last thing before I go. I don't think I mentioned it, but drug cases are very powerful cases because the sentencing is very severe. Okay? So, for instance, and I'm just making a suggestion, 50 grams of meth on the federal level will land you in five years of jail minimum. So, what I would suggest, when we work cases in the Valley that end up on the street, and we work them for a long time, we put these cases together so that we can actually put people away for a significant period of time. And that's why we use narcotics cases. So, with that, thank you again for your time. And my name's Chris Wilson.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. John Roca, are you ready? Yep. All right. This is Mr. Roca. He is the resident agent in charge for the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. Thank you, John, for coming and doing this.
No, thank you. As he said, my name is John Roach. I'm the resident agent in charge. For basically my area is North Los Angeles County. So that's anything that the 101 freeway, the 134 freeway touches and goes north all the way up to Kern County. Population-wise, it's about the size of Chicago. I have one office up here in the West Valley with 2 groups, and we are charged with enforcing every single law in the books, with the sole exception of Title 26. So for those of you who are not federal investigators, that's tax evasion. We don't do taxes. But everything else we do Title 21, Title 5, Title 18. That means drugs, counterfeit merchandise, you name it, it's something that we're covering. I had a very pleasant conversation before this meeting started with a retired teacher over here, which is near and dear to my heart because my parents were teachers as well. And I was telling her, we actually had a case up here in the East Valley, or in the West Valley, where the single largest collection of child pornography on earth was sitting resident in a house right across the street from a very popular middle school. We've arrested that individual. The collection that we pulled out was, you might hear an acronym called NCMEC. It's where the collection of all of the known child pornography is there. This collection was larger than NCMEC's collection. So we used it to enhance their collection by sending it back. Out here in the East Valley, we recently executed search warrants on counterfeit merchandise, on high-end purses, scarves, Rolex watches. Interesting thing is they were marketing to the entertainment industry. So some of these celebrities you see on television, if their purse looks a little funny, it's probably counterfeit, and these people probably sold it to them. We had something else in the East Valley where we seized $22.5 million worth of counterfeit military-grade integrated circuits, mostly used in military aircraft. So they were faulty. If we hadn't taken those, there's probably a plane that would have gone down in a training mission somewhere. One of the things that we do in addition to that, and is the reason I was here tonight, is human trafficking. And as you can tell from the wide variety of things that we have to handle, and I only have 2 groups that do it, we have to be very selective as to what we do, and we try to do as much as we possibly can. We work with our colleagues very closely, our law enforcement counterparts and the locals as well, and we try to get as much as we can covered. But when it comes to human trafficking, the thing that we focus on, because we are the only federal agency that handles the borders. We have border search authority, and we still handle all of that. And we're not exclusive as far as immigration, but as a practical matter, we are. So we are focused on transnational human trafficking. So if you have somebody who came across the border, either the trafficker or the victim, that would involve us, and we would get involved with that. I can tell you my personal view on it is every single person involved in the sex trade is a victim. Every single person. There are some people who try to make the distinction and say, well, they're independent. They're indies, they call them, meaning that the females or the male, whatever the case may be, is out there doing that by choice. I don't believe you have a choice. And it's a larger picture. It comes down to the economy. This is the only resource they have to sell. So in my personal view, I consider them to be self-trafficked. And although that is not a term that's commonly thrown around, I believe that it's a very problematic concept that's going around, this self-trafficking, because they have no other alternatives. Because of that, one of the things that I insist in my group, and I deal with all of my agents the same way, and that is that every single person is being dealt with respect. When we pick them up, they're victims. They're young ladies. You know, they're ma'am. Okay, and that is how they are addressed. Yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. How are you doing? Because they are still people deserving of respect, okay, regardless of what they may be doing or what you think of them. I think our best prospects for addressing this is with the NGOs, some of the fantastic work that they've been doing. Because until you can get them back on their feet and you can get them their GED, you can give them some alternative to standing on a street corner, they're going to be on that street corner. And as some other people have observed, prison has never helped anyone. Whether it is the prostitute or whether it is the John, it's not helping anyone. They don't come out of prison rehabilitated. That's kind of an archaic concept, and we can debate that at some other time. But providing the services and the education typically yields the largest feedback. So what do we do with respect to trafficking? Well, there are some pretty harsh laws on the federal books with respect to human trafficking, peonage, those types of things. But our most difficult part of making these cases is just identifying it. Because one of the things that is our problem here is that anybody who carries a badge, we are part of the problem because we carry a badge. The person who is trafficking them tells them every single day, you don't want to get arrested. If you are here from out of the country, they tell them, you will be deported. I am part of that control problem because they are telling them that I will deport them. What is the truth? I will not deport them. I will help them. We have a lot of alternatives. We work with the NGOs very closely. I know, Mary Magnan, you work with Rohita Khan out of my office. It's down in Long Beach. She comes up here periodically. We have some of the people who work with her. And we can't do it without the NGOs because we pick somebody up and they give us a story about a lot of labor trafficking, working in a restaurant for years or working as a maid for years with no compensation whatsoever, or being a sex slave and being passed around when there's a need for money. We get them out of that situation and we do not deport them. We find a way to give them a quasi status until we can get them an actual status. But as law enforcement, we can't do much more than pull them out of that situation. So the first call we make is to the NGOs, and they put them someplace safe for the night. They put clothes on their back and they put food in their stomach. And then they help us work with that and make good witnesses out of them so that we can proceed with our cases. Now, one of the things that would really help us, not necessarily new legislation, but in the prosecution portion of it, on both sides of it, it's not just the Johns. Sometimes we'll see prostitutes who are picked up and we will see a whole slew of trespassing convictions on there. Well, we all know what that is. That's prostitution, and when you step up there, whether you have a lawyer or not, the city attorney says, plead this down to trespassing, are disturbing the peace. And, is that the right thing to do or not? I don't know. I don't know about the domestic side of it, but when it comes to what I do, I can't do anything with a disturbing the peace or trespassing. But if I see prostitution on there, that gives me the leverage to go in because prostitution is a deportable offense. And once we have them on the hook for that, they generally start talking to us as to how they got into that situation, who put them in that situation, who else is back at the apartment who might be in that situation. They begin to cooperate. The unfortunate thing is until they hit their lowest point, they tend not to cooperate. And so the prosecutors and the judges who let them plead this out to trespassing sometimes tie our hands. You know that immigration is a very political issue, particularly in a city like Los Angeles. And no matter what you do, half the people are going to agree with you and half of them are going to disagree with you. Okay? So we constantly run into that problem where people will identify Homeland Security investigation with immigration because we are a Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And we do have immigration authorities. But that can be a very effective tool for us. Like I said, if you don't reach out to us, what ends up happening is once they go through the system, they get handed over to ERO, it's another division, and they will happily deport these people. Happily deport the victims, happily deport the witnesses. Or sometimes, somebody who's a subject of a larger investigation, they will happily deport them to help them evade prosecution on something more serious. So unless HSI gets involved and puts a hold on all of that, you know, it's just kind of something we deal with on a daily basis on our inner workings. It's a very complex issue. Sometimes the locals can work with us, and sometimes they can't because the political climate is do not work with immigration right now. There's an election coming up, whatever it is. Then at other times, they'll look at exactly what we're doing, and they'll be right there with the task force with us. So, as I said, we have things that, you know, we're trying to balance out here. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Yes, I'm confused. Saying that you want to try to help the prostitutes, and your hands are tied if they're let down. On the other hand, you say prostitution is a reportable offense, so how can you help them if they're going to be deported?
Because what we don't, if you have someone, for example, say they have a green card, or even a visa, they're here on a student visa, but what they're actually doing is prostituting. And we see a lot of that with some of these English language schools. They're not really attending school. It was just a means to get into the country. And we come across them and they have a trespassing conviction. There's nothing we can do about that. And they know that. They'll look us right in our eye and say, I have nothing to say to you. And we have to release them. If we have the prostitution conviction, now they have to cooperate. They have to be placed into a position where they cooperate. Because the prostitution conviction is going to allow us to revoke the visa right then and there. And now you're either leaving or cooperating. That's correct. And generally that's how we work it, is we will never deport anybody who is assisting. And typically what ends up happening is once we're looking at a larger investigation, and once again, I'll refer you back to the